Good afternoon. Can you hear
Hi.
me?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Okay. So I want to just download your paper again that oh, and you sent me as a PDF file. So I really
Oh,
cannot,
PDF file?
no, I guess, well, I see, yeah, I mean, that was an issue, right? I mean, so this is your paper. So what did I write in comments on your paper? Did I write comments on your paper? All right, so,
Yes, you did.
okay, so I'm trying to find where I put those comments. And I think this is it. Um, so let me save it again, just in case, save as. And so you want to make sure that I think that I sent you the copy killer report, that there were some issues there. Right, this copy killer report. So anytime you copy text from another source, even if it's just phrases, you know, you need to put them in quotation marks, okay?
Quotation marks. Okay.
Yeah, I think I highlighted that. And
Actually, you didn't.
but I sent you the copy killer report, right? I posted.
You mean the midterm essay?
No, the final exam paper. Oh,
Oh, no, you didn't.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the midterm paper. Sorry, I gotta find the final exam.
About the midterm paper, I saw the copy killer confirmation of the
Okay.
midterm essay, and the plagiarism rate was quite high. And
Okay.
even though I put the link in the back, it was recognized as plagiarism. So
Okay.
if this affected the score, can I mark it as a footnote this time?
No, this I'm sorry. I was looking at the wrong paper. So let me look at the final exam, your final exam here, and so okay, I found the right paper. So here, okay, so you can see that, can't you? I think you can see that. Let me see, share screen. And here you go. I think that's it. Okay, so from the perspective of realism in international politics, the other emerging state that threatens superpower only collapses peace. According to a research team at Harvard University, 11 out of 15 times ended war when emerging and status quo countries interact in history. Okay, so what is this? What's the source for that?
Yes.
Is that from Hook? Is that in the Hook book? Hook textbook?
No, it's
okay.
Just on the internet.
Okay, so you need to cite the source, and of course, I mean my reaction to that statement is this, of course, that but the world underwent some really significant change in 1945 with the use of nuclear weapons, right? That we all know that there's nuclear war between, full-scale war between nuclear powers, that will probably be suicidal. Although I make that statement, and I'm surprised by some of the media reporting I see today about how, just it's very unusual to me. I mean, since I grew up during the Cold War, how I'm seeing all this commentary about how there might be war between US and China over Taiwan. Like as if, and I don't know if it's a combination of well, partly it's the journalists not, I don't know, criticizing or analyzing the reporting, but they're reporting what some of the research or analyses that are made by US government Defense Department officials that as if war between US and China over Taiwan is not going to escalate to nuclear conflict. Like they'll be able to, they'll kill each other by the hundreds, maybe in the thousands, but they won't continue to escalate and lose control of the situation to produce somebody using a nuclear weapon to impose their will. Like I can imagine how, the Taiwan declares independence, somehow China mobilizes somebody, and then somebody fires a nuclear weapon to stop the American Air Force from bombing and killing Chinese soldiers trying to invade Taiwan, just to knock out the American aircraft carrier. And I guess what I'm saying is, I'm trying to make sense of how over the last few months, particularly, well, since, I don't know, even before the Biden administration, but particularly since the Biden administration, there's this open discussion. It's reported in the New York Times about war between US and China over Taiwan. Like, I don't understand how that is so readily done during the Cold War with the Soviet Union, where this threat, this danger of direct conflict between US and Soviet Union was always understood as something to be avoided, that you had to deter the Soviet Union and the Soviet Union had to deter the United States through mutually assured destruction. And I'm still trying to make sense of why has there been this change in talking about China? Is it because that they think the Chinese will back down? That they think that China is not like, is there an assumption somehow the Soviet Union was trying to dominate the world and it would be willing to fight a full-scale world war if it could win it, to win the control over the world? But China, they don't want that. They just want so the Chinese will be deterred, or will not escalate to full-scale war if they lose over Taiwan, or the Americans will accept being defeated in any kind of wartime scenario by China if China were to use force to unify the Taiwan with the mainland. And I guess but that's a major difference, right? That still, with thousands and thousands of nuclear weapons, there is the danger of conflict escalating out of control, right? I mean, what was it, Mike Tyson? Mike Tyson, the boxer, Mike Tyson, in terms of what he talks about, how you win a boxing match. He says, everybody's got a plan. Everybody has a strategy until you get punched in the mouth. In other words, once you get punched in the mouth, any planning goes out the window and it becomes just a fist fight. And I think that would be that danger of something similar happening with regard to U.S. Beijing conflict seems obvious to me, but I read these news reports, and the U.S. Defense Department is projecting out scenarios where it fights a conflict, a military battle with China over Taiwan, and it doesn't escalate to nuclear war. It leads to either China backing down, or more likely the United States being defeated without nuclear war. Like this, I mean, we're just living in very unusual times now. So in the past 17th century, religious wars were the only starting point and justification of wars, but the main cause was the imbalance of power. Does Hook make this statement? Is this in the Hook textbook? So, your paper is a first draft, right? You wrote down your ideas, you did some research, but now you have to refine, develop your points by using and citing information, particularly from the Hook textbook, to support your comments. I mean, I don't know, any claim that you make, you have to support with evidence. Okay. Does Hook make that statement in the book?
No, we didn't.
Well, again, any claim you have to, because that's just the nature of the field in political science. Everything is controversial. So if you're going to make a statement, you have to support it with evidence, because everybody will challenge you. Somebody will always challenge your statement. Like, what's the evidence for that? All right. You say it's also the same in the current status quo. You say, so you're arguing it's the nature of Chinese communism versus American liberalism is not the main cause of conflict between US and China.
Yes.
Okay. In other words, you're arguing more from a realist perspective, that you have US at this, realism has this assumption that basically human nature is fundamentally includes a deep desire for human beings to influence and control other human beings just for its own sake, not to get something else, but because they just like doing that. That's something that there's a drive. So the fact that the United States as a state is at the top of the international system is going to naturally have a conflict with a rising China, because as China gets more and more power capability, it wants to have more influence over you and me and the whole world, in terms of our thinking and our behavior. And since the world is now dominated by American power and influence, the Americans raising China's influence is going to reduce American influence. And America will resist. And that's a fundamental realist point of view, right? And that then it's not fundamentally important about the nature of the political systems between the two countries that is important for explaining that conflict, that fundamental source of conflict, right? I mean, realists might look to say 120 years ago, right? Let's look, for example, at lots of comparisons are made between the United States and Great Britain. That the United Kingdom's at the top of the system 120 years ago, and there's rising Germany. Germany's industrializing, unifying, it's growing more rapidly than Britain. It's got more population than the United Kingdom, and Germany wants to have equal status in the world in terms of influence, as roughly equal influence, at least, if not more, but roughly equal influence as the United Kingdom, which means they're going to reduce the influence of the United Kingdom in the world because they want more and more influence themselves. So how do you get that influence and power in the world? At that time, that meant, well, if Germany wants to be equal with France and Britain and Russia, it wants an empire. Because and the Japanese are saying the same thing. This is what you need in the end of the 19th century to be considered one of the great powers, is you have to have an empire. And even the Americans buy into that when they conquer Cuba and Puerto Rico and Philippines, and they get an empire from Spain. And Britain is going to resist.
Yeah.
And if you compare like the political and economic and social systems of Germany with the United Kingdom, they're much more similar than the comparison than the American and Chinese systems today, right? I mean, in 1901, Britain and Germany both had elected parliaments. In 1901, they were Christian countries, European countries. They had elected, as I mentioned, elected parliaments. Now, the emperor in Germany, he had a lot more formal power than the British king in the United Kingdom, but he could control foreign policy if he wanted to, and he could also he controlled the army, all right, but the military, but of course the British king didn't have those formal powers, but he had a lot of informal influence over the military, and he was the leader of the aristocracy in Britain, and that conflict between United Kingdom and Germany, that set the stage for the First World War. It didn't trigger it, but it set the stage.
Yes.
Right. So a realist would say, it really, China could be a monarchy, China could be a democracy, China could be a quasi-democracy, something like Russia. The kind of political system it has is not really fundamentally important in terms of explaining this escalating conflict between U.S. and China.
Oh, so you're saying,
you think that's, huh?
Yeah, yes.
What about liberalism? What about the liberal argument that, no, don't underestimate the importance of institutions? I mean, China is not going to have a Cold War with the United States because China is so embedded into the global economy, owning, I think, trillions of dollars of US Treasury bonds. I mean, so many American companies have made big investments in China. Those interests, those business interests, they're very influential, but they also tend to be quiet because business people don't like public conflict. They like to lobby behind the scenes, and you can bet that they are lobbying to try. I mean, I know just reading the business section that they are very unhappy with Donald Trump's tariffs on Chinese imports because they need those imports to complete their production inside the United States. And so they're lobbying to get the Biden administration to remove the Trump tariffs on China, but Biden can't do that because of American nationalism. That's the main problem from the liberalism point of view. The liberalism doesn't deal with nationalism very well. It just assumes that everybody wants to focus on economic prosperity as their primary concern. And economic prosperity is important, but economic prosperity during a time of crisis will typically not determine economic interest will not override nationalism during the time of international crisis. I mean, you saw that, leading up to World War I. I mean, there were lots of studies made about how in 1914, the global European economy of 1914 was very economically integrated, very economically interdependent. In terms of finance and trade, you didn't need a passport to travel between France and Germany before World War I. Anybody could go anywhere before World War I. And that only changed after World War I, and still had World War I, despite all of the economic interests, all of the cultural ties. So so I think that, in terms of a crisis, constructivism is the third general perspective introduced by Hook in the beginning of the book, in the textbook. Right? Constructivism tries to focus more on explaining nationalism. And when does nationalism and national identity become and how does national identity and how can identities change? Because all of these different perspectives, liberalism, realism, and constructivism, they're trying to come up, they're in the tradition of international relations theory that wants to deal with this problem of deadly force in international politics. The use and threat, the threat and use of deadly force. Because conflict itself is not necessarily a bad thing, right? Conflict and competition, that's always part of human society. I mean, I have conflicts with my family, I have conflicts with my competitors, and conflict and dealing with the conflict can produce growth, it can produce change, it can produce economic development, it can produce technological progress. Conflict itself is not a bad thing, it's part of human society. What we are concerned about is when conflict becomes deadly, when conflict involves the threat and use of physical violence, or the threat or use of harm, or application of physical harm against people, including economic sanctions that cause people to starve because they can't trade, like what's going on right now in Afghanistan, where the United States is putting sanctions on the Taliban and on Yemen, and these people cannot engage in international trade and commerce because they can't use the financial system. Because if you can't use the global financial system, you can't do business, and which means you can't have an economy that can survive in today's world. And so millions of people on the brink of starvation now in Afghanistan. So and the United States liberals, they focus upon this awareness, inspiring this awareness of interdependence, that you need to be aware of this, but they also understand when there are they focus on institutions, but they also understand the role of bad institutions. Like liberals for hundreds of years have always been suspicious of what they call standing armies, professional armies, because professional armies consist of people and groups that have vested themselves in the art of warfare. And so they're going to justify and view the world in ways that justify why they exist. So if you have a big standing army, you're going to have a big lobby group portraying the world in violent, nasty ways because their job is to prepare for the worst, to fight wars. So they're going to portray the world and talk about the world in ways about preparing for the worst. You see it right now with the US military talking about war with China over Taiwan. And that's a lot of people. With the military industrial complex in the United States, with all the people that are in the Defense Department, in the national security bureaucracies, and all of their companies that supply them with weapons and technology. And so liberals, going back to John Locke, they don't like professional armies for this reason. And now we have this big professional army, military industrial complex that liberals point to. I mean, that's what liberals claimed in 1914 when Woodrow Wilson was talking about, we're going to fight World War I coming in at the 1917 towards the end to make the world safe for democracy. It will be the war to end all wars. And how will we make the world safe for democracy? We'll get rid of these Kaisers and these aristocrats, these Yangban who dominate in Germany and elsewhere, that they claim that they should dominate their countries because they are the warrior class. And so they make wars happen because by making wars happen, they justify themselves and their dominance. Get rid of them, create state governments that represent the people, wherever you draw those boundaries, which is difficult to do because the people are all mixed up, Czechs and Slovaks and Serbs and Croats and Muslims, so that's another issue. But and have elections where the people will elect pragmatic, I almost said business-oriented leaders who will focus on providing a better quality of life for their people. And that means prosperity, which means trade.
Mm-hmm.
And that will make the world safe for democracy. And of course, it didn't work out that way because of hostility to Germany and nationalism and the economic Great Depression that led to Hitler coming to power. But Mussolini came to power in 1922, long before the Great Depression started in 1929. And so, it wasn't just the Great Depression that contributed to this. But the liberalism said, the liberals argued that the problem was, for example, the lack of a commitment to creating a truly global economy, which this time we'll get right in 1944-45 with the creation of the Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization. And we'll bring in China into the World Trade Organization, which joined the World Trade Organization just like 3 months after the September 11, 2001 attacks. China joined the WTO in 2001. And that will, encourage these countries to, and it will encourage China to democratize. And we'll see, but they haven't democratized so far. And in fact, they're becoming more authoritarian or totalitarian than Xi Jinping. But the Chinese are sensitive to charges because even now, Joe Biden is organizing some 100-country virtual summit on democracy, and didn't invite China because they don't view China as a democracy. And there are a lot of countries that are not very democratic, obviously, in that 100-member summit. But China felt the need to respond, and that was issued, reported today in the press that China issued a report claiming it's a democracy, it's a real democracy, delivering real substantive benefits to the people, not like America's fake democracy with its, and they were sensitive to that charge. But you could make an argument that liberalism does work if there are countries that understand their enlightened interest in cooperating to make a liberal international order feasible. But at the same time, liberalism does recognize the need for the people, however you define the people, to have representation. So the problem with the United States problem of liberalism is that, of course, the Americans don't think political Islamists have the right to self-determination. They don't think that that the Arab countries should be allowed to change their borders by force. They keep intervening in the Middle East and to support Israel, which, from a liberal point of view is problematic. And I think constructivists would focus upon the relationship of identity to institutions as their contribution to understanding how realism and liberalism have weaknesses or faults in terms of explaining why their assumptions about how the world works are weak or not fully developed, and they need to understand the role of identities and nationalism as a topic that's more of a focus, and in terms of also understanding how new values and new identities emerge. Like, can we create a true European identity? Can we promote European identity on building upon these old European national identities? Can we create a cosmopolitan identity by promoting global human rights and environmental protection? how do you explain the development of the global human rights movement? How can we promote that? How can we reinforce cooperation through exploiting institutions to promote dialogue and avoid escalation of conflicts that are become overwhelmed by nationalist stereotyping. So, I mean, do you have any questions?
Yes. So you're saying that I just wrote about realism perspective. So you want me to add constructivism and liberalism?
Well, I mean, do you think that basically, realism's claim that basically conflict and intense conflict in the United States and China is inevitable means that there's going to be there's going to be inevitably a war, a conflict, or a Cold War between them? Is that what you're saying? A Cold War is inevitable between the U.S. and China?
Yeah, I think. But I understood. Yes.
Despite the fact that China's so different from the Soviet Union because China is intensely integrated in a global capitalist economy. The only thing the Soviet Union sold under capitalism was oil and gas to basically oil and gas to Europe. But China, supplies computers, smartphones, everything comes out of China.
I understood the Cold War as a physical. It's not all about physical war. I understood about ideology war and the ideas they have between U.S. and China. And
that's good. That's good.
And trade war. I think that is another Cold War. It's not a physical war, but yeah, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, we don't want to underestimate trade war because trade war does cause suffering. I mean, when the Americans put sanctions on Iran or Afghanistan, people are going to die. People are dying because of the economic suffering. So let's not underestimate the impact of indirect conflict. But if that's what you're arguing, that basically conflict is becoming more and more competitive oriented, competition oriented, indirect competition oriented rather than direct confrontational because of the interdependencies and the awareness of global interdependency for security and economic and other interdependencies, the conflict has to be more competition focused, not confrontation focused. And that is one way by which to integrate liberal and constructivist thought into understanding how the world will be different from the Cold War with the Soviet Union, even as the United States and China become more intensely competitive with each other. How does that sound?
Yeah, I will try.
Yeah, well, you say that as China appears as a competitor. I mean, I want to be optimistic too. I want to believe that we're not going to have an old Cold War that could produce violent conflict. But there are these. I mean, there are these reports coming out of Washington, out of the Defense Department of the United States that project war and talk about war with China, and they talk about it as if it's. I mean, I know they were doing that under the Soviet Union. They came up with different models about what to do with a conflict with the Soviet Union. But I guess it's strange to me because until 2017, US and China didn't talk about war with each other. They were, I mean, it was only in the last 5 years that under Trump, when Trump was president, that we now have this intense escalation in conflict with the US and China, at least on a level of words. It was Trump that tried to get countries not to buy Huawei telecommunications equipment. It was Trump that tried to do, but Trump also had Xi Jinping come to Mar-a-Lago and visit him in his Florida home, and they had a banquet together before this. So it's like, how much of this is political theater? How much of this is just efforts to appeal to domestic audiences as well as international audiences? How much of this is indirect appeal for propaganda campaigning? And maybe that's a good thing, as long as it lessens the likelihood that military conflict will escalate between the United States and China. Even as China rises and is building more military bases. I mean, I was listening this morning to the radio that the U.S. Defense Department is concerned that China is apparently trying to build a military base in Equatorial Guinea on the west coast of Africa. China already has a military base in Djibouti. The Americans have hundreds of military bases. Oh my God, China's going to build a second global international military base. Oh my God, what does it mean? Oh my God, America has hundreds of them in Korea and Japan, all over the world. But they assume that's good. That's a good thing because America is a force for peace and democracy in the world. China's bad. That's a totalitarian country. So the United States is trying to stop Equatorial Guinea, that's the country, from accepting the Chinese base. They're pressuring Equatorial Guinea to say no, this little country in Africa. But why doesn't China view necessarily America as a force for peace in the world? Partly because they think American force for peace in the world means that China has to be like Russia, a second rank power, cannot be equal to the United States. That's their view. China may not be equal to the United States because China's bad. It's a communist country. And so, you think about this also. Germany and United Kingdom were not that different, but the British came to view Germany as bad. The Huns, they're the Huns, they're barbarians. Well, that was during the war, leading up to after the war broke out. That was the propaganda they used. Okay, do you have any questions?
I saw that on the cyber campus you mentioned 3 numbers, 450, 500, 550 words. Is this part means introduction, body, and conclusion?
No. Your whole paper should not be longer than 550 words in length, just the body of your paper, okay?
Okay.
500 words plus or minus 10%. That's what I meant.
Oh.
Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay, I'll send you the link to the recording, okay? All right, bye.
Thank you.